Hello, welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's the Monday Show live. I'm Andrew Musgrove and he is Mark Crothers. And it's Groundhog Day again, ladies and gents. Newcastle have lost on the road. Another really disappointing trip to the capital, this time ending with Newcastle United losing 3-1 to Brentford, despite once again scoring first. It's now 9 without a win away from home in the Premier League, and with Newcastle closer to the relegation zone than the top four. Questions are mounting about the reasons and the solutions to the problem at Newcastle United. Coming up in today's episode, we'll dissect the game and look at the bigger picture. As always, we are sponsored by NordVPN. The link is in the podcast description box. If you really want security while online, NordVPN is the plan for you. You can get a discount offer by hitting up the link. Mark, welcome to the show. How are you keeping? You well?
Yeah, I'd like to say I was looking forward to spending this time with you today, but not as much as normal. It's
I can't be bothered.
It's just
I'm tired. I'm so tired.
It just feels that way, doesn't it? It's I think we're going to be as lethargic as Newcastle were yesterday throughout that 90 minutes. So
look at that, perfect segue, perfect way to describe how Newcastle United were. No, we're going to be better. They give us the motivation to be better, right?
They have, yeah. It's something like that, yeah.
We've got to give the people a better performance than what Eddie Howe's Magpies did yesterday.
Got a short reaction, that's what it is.
Yes, they lost on the road again. Took the lead against the run of play through Harvey Barnes, but once again failed to build on the lead. And thanks to goals from Kevin Schade and a double from Igor Thiago, they fell to a defeat. It was a deserved defeat, in my opinion. No arguments from me whatsoever. And I actually think, Mark, it was a worse performance than what was served up against West Ham, simply because of what happened at West Ham. And to allow yourselves to go down that same path just 7 days earlier, yeah, I think it was actually a worse performance.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also think that everything that is positive in Eddie Howe, Newcastle United, was kind of conspicuous by its absence yesterday. There was no, I said it yesterday, the whole mantra of intensity is our identity. It was lethargy, wasn't it, yesterday? It was just all over the place. From the first minute, I thought they looked underwhelming. They took the lead against the run of play, with possibly one of their only positive attacking moments in the game. Other than that, it just looked disjointed. They looked like they were lacking in confidence. There was certainly a lack of energy in the game. There was no control. I thought at times, well, I'd say at times for large parts, the defence looked a little all over the place. Barring maybe Kieran Trippier, I thought was one of the slightly more positives of the game. But yeah, it's just across the board, just not good enough. And by the way, I include those in the dugout as well, on the technical area, as I spent most of the game in there. There was a lack of clarity. There was a lack of clear thinking. And again, that kind of goes back to what we said about West Ham. It's exactly the same arguments.
Yeah, you could have taken the colour of the jerseys out and played that second half, and you would not have been mistaken if you'd said it was West Ham Newcastle were playing. The highlights of last weekend, because it was that poor, especially the second 45. No creativity. The players looked tired. They looked lost, and they just looked really down and gloomy and kind of resigned to what was coming down the road, even though they were leading 1-0. I think for me, what is most worrying is that I'm not angry. I'm not disappointed. I just expected them to lose. Now, we had Daniel on the View from the opposition, and he got a lot of grief because he was very confident about Brentford's chances. He actually predicted a 3-1 victory for the Bees, and a few people who watched the episode were in the comments calling them cocky and what have you. But I think the majority of Newcastle United fans previewing this game expected to lose. And I do think that fine margin from being angry and disappointed to just being blasé in many ways about what happened, it's a little bit of a dangerous path to be heading down.
You know, when you spoke to sort of other clubs, from journalists from other clubs, reporters from other clubs last season, I would always say there was, I don't know if you say a fear factor, but a wariness of Newcastle in terms of horrible play against, energy. Again, I keep going back to it, but intensity, aggressive. I think that in itself, what you just said there, sums up that there is a changing of perspective of Newcastle United now, especially away from home. Yes, there have been times at home for large parts of the Arsenal game, for the Liverpool game, the Champions League nights where there has been that aggressiveness and that intensity again. I'm sorry, I keep going back to it. The energy. But most of the time this season, I feel as if they've just fallen well short of what you expect. And again, that goes across the board. There have been positives from the season. We know that. But I think at the moment, when you look at the season as a whole, it feels as if Newcastle have gone backwards.
Do you think that kind of expectation of defeat on the road that I had and that many of our listeners and viewers shared going into this game, is that in the dressing room as well? They certainly are lacking confidence. Whether they expected to get beat off Brentford, I'm not too sure. They hopefully weren't that pessimistic, but the lack of confidence is certainly a big issue, isn't it?
It's a massive issue. It's a massive issue because, and we've been here before with Newcastle teams in the past, where we've looked at away games and just straight away thought, well, we'll not get anything there, and you ride on your home form then. But I had no confidence yesterday going to that game. Even when Barnes scored, I looked at it and thought, you know what? I've got no confidence that they're going to build on it and get a second and maybe take the game out of sight. It always felt as if what annoyed me more than anything, and look, these midfielders, and I'm probably singling them out to an extent, they've had a lot of praise from us, from everyone. They've been described as one of the best, if not the best, in the Premier League. I never felt as if they had any control in that game yesterday. And the amount of second balls that Brentford were winning, not just in the middle of the pitch, but everywhere, it just meant Newcastle were constantly on the back foot. And that's not what we expect, what you come to expect from an Eddie Howe side. I know we'll come on to the Burns situation in a bit, but I just felt as if everything was a struggle yesterday. The simple passes, the movement, that little bit of energy to go and win the ball. It's sad, but when Joe Linton went off, I kind of thought that might be a positive because it might bring a bit of energy in midfield in terms of getting forward a bit more and supporting Nick Voltemada. And there's another issue there because whatever kind of positives there were from the way Nick Voltemada plays on home soil certainly aren't being replicated away from home.
A lot to unpick there. I think firstly, the midfield issue is just, it's hard to watch away from home because at home they are very good, but away from home they've got no control over games. They seem to be lacking energy, lacking fight. And look, I'm not questioning their attitude or their effort. Of course they want to turn up and win games, but yesterday they were totally overrun and they just didn't seem to want to put themselves up, and they didn't seem to be wanting to be counted. And that's really frustrating, especially given what happened last Sunday at West Ham. We expected a reaction, and we all said they'll probably win against Bilbao, but Sunday's the real test. And now Bilbao is slightly diluted in those separate competitions, but you really wanted to go into this international break on the back of a win. Now you've got 2 weeks to really think about it. And what the solution is, I don't know. The solution we have to find is to Nick Voltemada, but like I say as well, to that midfield. I mean, it's a good time, Mark, to start with the starting 11. It was kind of as expected. And on one hand, we do have to say, regarding Dan Burn, this left-back situation, there was a lot of calls for him to drop out of the starting 11 against Brentford. But Eddie Howe does have limited options. He doesn't want to rush Lewis Hall back. Alex Murphy isn't good enough, and Matt Targett is out on loan. So he's left with Dan Burn. We know that is kind of the caveat when we talk about Dan Burn at left-back. But on the other hand, when you know you're facing a winger like Atara, who is quick, he wants to take on the full-back, he's tricky, maybe you do have to think about dropping Dan Burn. Now, he didn't, which came back to bite Newcastle United. He's lived a charmed life in many ways as Dan Burn over the past few games, where he's been beaten once or twice, but then made up for it. And maybe the results have been positive, especially at home, so we don't talk about it too much. But in the last few weeks, he's definitely starting to get exploited a bit more. Obviously, against Bilbao, beautiful goal, and that kind of maybe papered over the cracks. But 40% of Brentford's attack came down their right. And Atara, every time he got the ball, he just felt he was going to get the beating of Dan Burn from the word go. Now, we're going to talk about the penalties and the dismissal later on in the episode, but from the start, should Lewis Hall have played?
It's easy to say with the benefit of hindsight, but I think it would be difficult for Hall to start that game because I don't think he's at the levels fitness-wise. However, and again, I know we'll come on to this, I do think, and I'd be shocked if there's anyone that doesn't think this, he should have come on even at half-time, because I think the warning signs were there in the first half. Every time Atara got the ball, you just thought, here we go again. And he was driving. We've seen Newcastle wingers do it. When you know they've got the beating of opposition fullbacks, they just drive and drive and drive and drive and go at them. And as the statistic proves there was a weakness that was exposed. It was identified and exposed by Brentford. And boy, did they expose it, because I just can't. I spoke about a lack of clarity of thinking on the touchline and a lack of ruthlessness. And we said this last week. Again, I'm just repeating what we said last week. And it's going to be difficult not to do that. But I felt as if the hesitancy to bring on Hall when it was so evident what was going to happen, it was like watching a car crash. You knew what was coming, yet there was no reaction. And I know Eddie Howe spoke about it in this post-match press conference. But for me, there can't have been any Newcastle fan watching that game going, no, give him another 5 minutes, give him another 5 minutes, because you knew what was coming. Burn has been unbelievable for Newcastle United. No one's doubting that. But I think now it's becoming quite an easy decision for Eddie. It should be an easy decision for Eddie Howe. After the international break, Hall should be up to speed at least. I think he has to start against C.
And we're going to play that clip from Eddie Howe in a moment. But you said it there, difficult for Lewis Hall to start that game against Brentford. So does that just put to bed the criticism of Eddie Howe picking down Burn from the start? I'm not talking about what should happen at half time, but from the start, because still a lot of people are saying you knew what Atara was going to do. You knew what the game plan was. What the game plan has been for many managers over the last few weeks against Newcastle. It's to target that left-hand side.
It's difficult to say, because I don't know how you'd work this, but could there be a tweak in formation and maybe move Burn into a left side of a 3? And I don't know who would then play left wing back. Could you play a Murphy with Trippier at left wing back?
Well, are we just highlighting the fact that, we can ask these questions of why Burn started, but we're giving you the answers here.
There's a lack of
bodies. Eddie Howe has no option.
Yeah. So again, going back to the Alex Murphy situation, isn't he would have been exposed massively yesterday? Got no doubt about that. So, and I've seen a lot of people online saying, why isn't he getting a chance? Why isn't he getting a chance? Because he hasn't really done it at 21's level. So why, if he's not really hit form at 21's level, do you then reward that with a chance in the first team in a really tough away game? So yeah, I think, look, Burn played because there was no alternative other than starting Hall and maybe trying to get an hour out of Hall, but then you're still bringing in Burn on the second half at some point, you would imagine. So it's a tough one. But I think, again, going back to what happened, what transpired in the second half, I think that is on the manager.
We'll start with a quick look at the first half, because there wasn't really too much to write home about from either side. Brentford were the better team, Nick Pope having to make a good couple of saves. And you just watched it and you could just tell Newcastle United were not at the races. They looked off the pace. They were second to most of the balls. They couldn't put a string of passes together whatsoever, which really annoyed me. But they did then get the lead against the run of play. Harvey Barnes, superb composure to turn and send 2 defenders to the floor before firing home. And the touch as well from Nick Valdemari in the build-up was really, really important. Let's have a bit of positivity. It was a lovely goal, wasn't it?
It was. It's just really hard to think of it that way because of...
Just stay on track, Mark.
I know, I'm trying. Because of everything that transpired afterwards, it's really hard to think of it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, look, I've seen people describe Harvey Barnes as the best finisher at the club. And I think you saw why yesterday, because it's... I mean, I don't know what you were doing, but I was sat there going, hit it. But he looked over... The one time a Newcastle player looked in control. And the way he's put 2 players down and then finished it, it is an outstanding finish. It is the positive to take away from the game, but it does feel as if it meant very little. I will try and be at least a little bit positive in the sense that at least it means another winger has had an impact in the Premier League, because I think my right in saying only Jacob Murphy's provided an assist or a goal. At least there's one with Barnes now, because we're still waiting on Langer to hit form. We're still waiting on Gordon to return to form.
He's taken his opportunity that has been handed, and he did so against Bilbao as well. You'd hope, especially again, given what happened last weekend at West Ham, that Newcastle would build on this 1-0 lead. And, for 2 to 3 minutes, they looked quite threatening. They looked quite good right after the goal, but it didn't last. And also, I think deep down, we kind of expected what was to come. But, that being said, Brentford only had a couple of half chances, really. The half-time whistle goes, Newcastle United go into the interval 1-0 up. And my question to you is, what do you think happens in the dressing room at that point? Does Eddie Howe go to the players, look, we've been here before, we need to make sure we do not lose this lead? Or does he try and be a bit more positive and say, you've done well enough, great finish, Harvey, and he just kind of maybe ignores the negatives? Because I'm just trying, I'd love to be in the dressing room to know what was said, because clearly what was said didn't work.
I'm really puzzled as to what he would have said, because if it was something along the lines of keep doing what you're doing, then it wouldn't have been enough because they weren't good enough. Yes, they got the lead, but they weren't good enough for 45 minutes. I would imagine he'd be asking for a raising of energy levels, for a raising of standards, because, Brentford were certainly showing both of those qualities, especially the energy and intensity in midfield. But whatever he said, it can't have been what transpired on the pitch. It can't, because Newcastle just dropped so far backwards. I think this maybe speaks to a lack of confidence. I think it maybe speaks to a lack of belief. And maybe, I'll tell you what it does. It shows that lessons weren't learned from West Ham. Because again, I would have thought Newcastle should have went in that dressing room at half time and thought, wow, we've done well to get a lead here because we're not playing well. And then they realised themselves. And this is one of my big problems, is that it feels like a lack of accountability from players as well. I know we'll always look to the manager first, because that's how we do it as pundits, as journalists, as fans. The manager always is the one that must take the brunt for whatever reason, when he shouldn't, really. He should take some of it. But the lack of accountability on the pitch yesterday, the lack of leadership, we spoke about Bruno, we spoke about Dan Burn in terms of leaders, and they have been. But yesterday, I didn't see anyone trying to front up and go around players. Your great captains that we've seen in the Premier League, and I'm at pains to keep going back to players like this, but can you imagine if Alan Shearer was on the pitch yesterday? He would have been, getting his hands on players and saying, come on, we need more. I didn't see that yesterday. And that frustrates me, because I think when things are going well at Newcastle, and the seasons that we've had, last season was an unbelievable year. Howe's kind of, when he resurrected the club, when he came in, took the club away from relegation, when they qualified for the Champions League for the first time, you looked around the pitch and the players were demanding of each other. They were screaming at each other. If there was a drop in the levels or standards, or someone didn't do something right or weren't doing something right, there was genuine anger and frustration come on. They were having to go at each other in the right way. I didn't really see any of that yesterday, and that's massive.
Yeah, there was a lack of reaction, wasn't there? Obviously, we don't want to see players pushing and shoving one another, but when a goal goes in or the pass is misplaced, you do want to see some sort of reaction, someone shouting at someone and gesturing for them to get into the right position, and just trying to provoke some sort of reaction. But that should have been a collective after what happened last time out at West Ham. And, we all said reaction, and it just wasn't there. And that is a massive worry. I'm going to dive into the comments here, Mark, because we've got quite a few people watching live, which is brilliant. Darren says, you don't mind playing badly if we are not dropping points. It happens to all Premier League clubs at times in the top half to get by.
Can I just jump in quickly? I don't mind them playing badly, because it happens. No team goes throughout a season playing 100% every game. But what I do mind is them playing badly and almost looking as if they're just accepting what's happening without trying to turn it around.
Yeah, and there seemed to be several players who resigned to what was to come.
Went through the motions.
Yeah, most certainly. We've got Gary saying, we've gone backwards. You lose your main striker to a rival and try to play catch up, then what do you expect? Isaac has caused all sort of issues at the club, including a lack of confidence. Truel says this is not all on one player leaving. She doesn't believe that Howe can get the team to gel, in her opinion. Sean says, how cannot handle more games? He's okay with one game a week when he can play a high press, but when he can't play that well, he is lost. And keep your comments coming in. Now, second half, we had hope that Newcastle, like we say, would build on that lead, come out, get a second, kill the game off. Didn't happen. Just before the hour mark, Brentford drew level thanks to a Kevin Schade header. But it's a goal of errors from Newcastle United. The long throw isn't dealt with. We knew what one of the main threats from Brentford was going to be. It was going to be these long throws. Very good at it. For some inexplicable reason, Nick Pope flies off his line, tries to punch the ball. He's absolutely nowhere near it. Finally falls to the goal scorer. But there's other issues within that goal that I want to talk about. Tonali, not for the first time in the box in which he's defending has the man got the better of Sam Tonali. It has happened far too often for my liking. He is a fantastic player. Yesterday was arguably one of the worst performances we've seen by him at Newcastle United, and his lack of, he just wasn't switched on. That's the bottom line. And Schade has a clear pathway to head that one in. Not impressed with that at all. Not impressed with Nick Pope at all. Your thoughts?
I find it hard to disagree with any of that. I think it was just a multitude of errors from the minute the throw came in. People will point to Botman not being commanding enough, but I think he's probably going for that header expecting Pope to come out and clear it, because clearly you'd hope there'd been some sort of signal.
Well, Pope, afterwards, he kind of throws his hands in the air at somebody, and I've been trying to work out who it is. It looks like it's more Valdemar than anyone, but I can't really see what Valdemar has done wrong in that instance.
No, and you're right, but then if you lose the first ball, you do whatever you can to win the second one, and as you say, it didn't happen with Tonali. The whole thing was just frustrating, and to a degree, the goal kind of summed up the performance. It was just, again, no clarity, no one taking command, no one seemingly communicating effectively, and just second best throughout.
I mean, if you're Eddie Howe, you'll be absolutely raging that you conceded from a long throw, because you can bet your bottom dollar that 40% of the work last week was about the threat from set pieces and long throws, and you've gone and conceded one. You'd be absolutely raging, wouldn't you?
You'd imagine Martin Mark would be really happy as well, the set piece coach, because he'll be working on those as well, you would imagine. Yeah, just like I say, just from the minute the throw came in, there's just a lack of every single quality that you need to defend something like that from across the board, from Pope to Botman to Tonali to everyone, and it's a complete failure.
Pope ends up going off with concussion. Hopefully he's okay.
Can I just make a quick point about that? And I'm not saying there should have been maybe I'm saying there should have been a yellow, but it really is endangering an opponent. Harry Kane does it all the time as well. When a goalkeeper or a defender goes up and claims it, and was it Schade, I think, or it might have been Thiago, I can't remember who it was, has edged into him and put him off balance. That to me is endangering an opponent. Just a little thing.
Let us know in the comments your thoughts on that one. And like I say, we hope he is okay. But in terms of that performance, and once again, some decent saves from him, but one huge error that has cost Newcastle United. You chuck in the customary kicking the ball into touch, which he did a few times as well. Surely there's no doubt, is there? Aaron Ramsdale will be number one versus Manchester City in a couple of weeks' time.
From my opinion, or from Eddie Howe's?
Let's go you and then Eddie.
Well, I said last week that I would have started Ramsdale against Bilbao, and I think I've seen nothing to suggest that I wouldn't do that anyway.
Do you think Nick Pope will be aware of all this debate around the number one spot and the competition that Ramsdale's bringing in? Do you think that's affecting his performances, because he's looking particularly shaky?
It shouldn't, because if you're going to have a mentality of being a top goalkeeper, you should expect to have top opposition, top sort of rivals competition behind you. You know, this is the way it works at the top level. Newcastle should have 2-3 players for every position. So as a goalkeeper, you've got to be big enough and have that mentality to cope with that. Now, surely is this not why Ramsdale's brought the club? An England goalkeeper, Champions League football on his CV, played in the Premier League for a top club in Arsenal. So in some ways, Newcastle are fortunate to have such what I would class as a high caliber replacement, alternative, whatever you want to class him as. For me, Ramsdale has to come in. I think the timing isn't right now.
Do you think Eddie Howe will make that decision that you mentioned on last week's episode? It's a case of what does Nick Pope have to do to be dropped in the eyes of Eddie Howe? I would hedge my bets and say the majority of people watching and listening to this would say it is time for Ramsdale to start. However, if you ask me to put a penny on what Eddie Howe will do, I think Nick Pope will start against Manchester City.
Depends what the injury is, I guess. That could force his hand a little bit if it is an injury. I know said it was concussion, which obviously he'll be back if that is the case. Again, I'll repeat what I said last week. What does Ramsdale have to do to get in? Because he's played 2 games. Admittedly, Newcastle dominated large parts of them. But against Tottenham, he's put in a strong performance, made some very good saves when he was called upon. His distribution was excellent. His command of his box and the final third when he came out of his area, he looked confident. I think he's generally a confident lad anyway. I think maybe it has come at the time when it is time for a change in goal. If anything, maybe just to take Pope out the firing line a little bit, because at the minute, I think, again, you will see clubs target him in the same way they have with Dan Burns. So I think the timing is right. Do I think Eddie will do it? I'm not so sure.
Let us know your thoughts in the comments on that one. Is it time for Aaron Ramsdale to become Newcastle United's number 1? Now, as soon as Brentford got that goal, only one team looked like winning. We were soon handed a bit of controversy thanks to VAR, with Atara being booked for diving after going past Dan Burn. It was a stone wall penalty, and how VAR didn't overturn that decision, I will never ever know. I was grateful at the time, but if we take off our black and white spectacles, goodness me, what an absolute shocker from VAR that is.
It's one of them. If it's the other way around, you're foreman. If it happened, if it was the other end of the pitch, if it was Harvey Barnes, you'd be foreman if it wasn't given. But
what is the point in VAR though? Minimal contact. Contact is contact.
Well, it was certainly more of a penalty than the penalty that was given.
Precisely. Unbelievable. But that should have been it for Burn. He should have been taken off at that point. He'd been booked earlier in the half for pulling back Atara. Just been given that lucky escape there with the penalty, and that should have been enough for Eddie Howe to take him off for Lewis Hall. Part of me, very large part of me actually, I would have taken him off at half time, because I think Atara had his number in that first half. And it was only ever going to get worse as the energy levels decreased in Dan Burn. And you watch him when he gets booked. Again, I hate to keep using the word resigned, but he was just resigned to what was coming down the line. Now, Dan Burn is usually a very happy and smiley man. You look at him and you can tell he's loving life, and he's kind of always joking, even though he's very serious in what the job he's got to do. Didn't see that from him from the word go. He looked tired to a degree, which obviously we talked about his great stamina. He's played nearly every single minute this season. But the big thing that was missing was that cheeky smile. And I think it was just the fact that he knew he was in for a game. As soon as the kickoff happens, he's been tested, and Atara was getting the better of him pretty much every single time. And that showed on his face.
Yeah, it did. It was notable, wasn't it? Particularly after the one when he kind of escaped. What I will say about the first one is I don't think Atara helped himself by going down the way he did. I think that's probably played a part in the it shouldn't, by the way, but in the decision-making process, I think they've probably looked at it and thought he's made most of it. If he'd gone down normally, he probably would have got it, I think. But the fact it's head backwards and all that. But no, you're right. It's a good point about Burns' body language. That was something I noted as well. But I noted that in the first half, he looked, every time the camera went on him, he looked stressed and, yeah, unhappy and uncomfortable. I guess the question would have been, could they get 45 minutes out of Hull to make the half-time sub? But I would also argue if you couldn't get 45 minutes out of a player, you probably shouldn't be on the bench. So maybe, yeah, that decision should have been taken. It certainly should have been taken after the let-off for the penalty.
Do you think, a bit like I asked you with Pope, all this speculation, of course, Dan Burn was asked about it in the pre-match press conference against Bilbao about playing left-back, and he obviously put his defence forward to why he can do it. But he's not going to be immune to everything that's going on. And again, we talk about mentality, and professional footballers shouldn't let themselves get bothered by it. But I would argue it's not as simple as that. You know, he will be hearing and seeing and reading everything that's been written about him. And do you think that's impacting his game, or was it just the fact that Atara had his number yesterday?
I think it's possibly a combination of factors, but again, I would go back to what I said about Pope, that if you are going to see yourself as a top-class player in the Premier League, you have to deal with this. You have, look, everyone's human. They're going to be impacted by talk. The thing is, no one will tell Dan Burn how poor yesterday was. He will know himself, and he will front up because we've seen that from him before. But again, looking forward to Man City, if Lewis Hall is fully fit, which he should be, he's got a nice little break now to get on the training pitch on a consistent basis. I think the decision is a very easy one for Eddie Howe to make.
Well, we'll wait and see on that. I mean, the big question, of course, is why Eddie Howe didn't take him off after that penalty was not given and Atara was booked. So we'll hear from Eddie Howe now in his post-match press conference where he's asked exactly that question, why Dan Burn didn't come off after that first chaotic incident with Atara.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're discussing that as the game's going on, but those moments obviously impact everything, because with hindsight, you then go, well, you could have done something before that moment. But with Dan's height being pivotal from the set plays and with Joelinton going off, we then suddenly would have become very small. So they're big calls to make. And yeah, of course, with hindsight, you possibly make a different decision. But of course, in that moment, I have to weigh up what I'm doing.
Now, I don't often disagree with Eddie Howe, but on this interview, I will do. I understand his point about the threat of set pieces and long throws, but given that Brentford had already scored from one, Burn being on the line clearly wasn't working. He wasn't the unbreachable monument that we hoped or needed. And given that Atara, as we've said, was beating him pretty much every time he went up against him, the threat from Atara down that flank, I think, was worse than a long throw or a set piece. Dan Burn couldn't handle him. Every single time he's been run at, you just saw one outcome. I don't think, in my opinion, the threat of the set pieces and Dan Burn's height was a good enough cause to keep him on the pitch, especially after that penalty wasn't awarded.
Yeah, again, I can't disagree with anything you've said there. Nor would I want to, because I think you bang on. For me, if anything as well, just to change the momentum of the game, because Lewis Hall, and we saw it as soon as he came on, he, to a degree, swung the momentum a little bit more in Newcastle's favour, because he was getting forward and linking up and showing that confidence on the ball. And kind of, I'm not going to say nullified Atara, because that would be ridiculous, but he did sort of get the grips of him a bit, certainly more than Burn was. Again, this goes back to kind of what I said against West Ham, and definitely what I would say of yesterday. It was a lack of clarity and a lack of clear thinking from the touchline, and maybe even overthinking it, to be fair. Thinking about the long throws, as you say, but they all came mostly from Atara putting Burn under bother.
Well, that's the other thing that I kind of took away from that comment. And again, it's easy to say this without talking to Eddie and asking him this question, but by highlighting the threat of the set pieces, are you not kind of playing into the opposition's hands? Because in many ways, you are shown a fear. And really, when you are as good as Newcastle United are, with the players they've got, and as good as a manager Eddie Howe is, you shouldn't be too concerned about that. Yes, be aware of it, and yes, prepare for it. However, you should be thinking about how you can hurt Brentford, but that just never seemed to be the case. It seemed to be how we contain Brentford's threat rather than Newcastle United hurting Brentford and winning that game. And I'm not saying that was the approach delivered by Eddie Howe, but that's, if you look at how they played, that's how it came across to me. I think those comments as well, obviously they're not in the full context of the game plan and the press conference, but just highlighting that's why we kept them on didn't sit too well with me, because like you've got Dan Burn isn't the solution to stopping these throws. You've got to be organised. You've got other players who aren't as tall as Dan Burn, but still are good in the air. Dan Burn isn't the sole solution to those set pieces, and actually him getting beat every time he's getting ran at is causing you more problems than the set pieces and the long throws coming in.
It did feel as if the pre-match and post-match narrative has been completely dominated by this talk of set pieces and long throws and corners and such like coming into the area. And yeah, I'm sorry. I really am sorry. I'm going to repeat myself, but it just felt like, again, it's been a little example of just a lack of clear thinking in the dugout or in the technical area, whatever you want to class it as. Eddie saying it with the benefit of hindsight, but again, I think, and I'll say what I said earlier, any Newcastle fan watching that game, or at least 99.9% of them, would have said after the first penalty, make the change. You could social media is difficult to judge in it because it is very reactive, but the vast majority, if not all of what I saw on social media when I was having a quick look through live in the game, was make the change, get Hall on. But you didn't.
The second penalty, which was less of a penalty than the one that wasn't given, came on 73 minutes, and we don't really need to discuss the foul because I've got no arguments about it. It's the build-up, which again is really, really worrying. Sven Botman, to put it kindly, had an absolute shocker. He could not handle Thiago whatsoever. And for this moment, not his worst of Sunday afternoon, by the way, he's pulled out by Thiago, who just turns him and delivers a delightful ball over the top. What happens next? Thiago finishes from the spot. Dan Burn sees red. And then we fast forward into injury time, and Brentford get another. Malik Thiaw manages to win the ball superbly well. It should be dealt with because Botman's close to him. Botman is switched off. He's just not aware Thiago's there. Unacceptable, to be quite honest with you. It doesn't matter how many minutes are left on the clock. It doesn't matter how the game has gone. You've got to be switched on right until the final moment. He wasn't. Thiago puts in the back of the net. And there were other examples of Botman as well. There was a moment in the first half when he is out of position and it's Atara gets the ball on the right, and all of a sudden Botman turns and tries to sprint after him, and he looks like he's running through cement. Like, I'm sure if he put a speedometer on him, he's going quite fast, but looking at it in real time, he's struggling to keep up with him. I know Atara's quick, but Botman looked a bit lethargic. We know how good he is, we know the ability he's got, but that is 2 consecutive games where he's not played very well, and in particular against Brentford, he was really, really shown a lesson by Thiago.
He was, yeah, and I think as well, I think there's maybe a lack of leadership at the heart of the defence. I think, again, this is easy with the benefit of hindsight, but you wonder how much of a miss Fabian Schär's been in there when he hasn't played, because he is vocal, you can see it on the pitch. And I just wonder if that's maybe played a part as well. I understand, though, why he stuck with Botman and Thiaw 100%, because
we all said we would.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Not a slight on the manager.
It's just the thing that annoyed me about the third goal was the fact that Newcastle were still kind of in the game at that point. They still could have got a point. It would have been totally undeserved, but they still got a point. And top defenders, which I think Botman can become one, but top defenders don't switch off like that. They know where their man is. They know what's around them. They're aware of it until the very last second of the game. But he just looked like he just didn't have a clue where Thiago was. I thought he was very good, by the way, Thiago. I will say that looks a real player. But at the same time, as a defender, first and foremost, you've got to know what's around you. You've got to be aware, and he just switched off.
To a wider point, because we've heaped praise on Joelinton, Tonali, and Bruno. We've heaped praise on Botman and Thiaw because they have looked very good together. What has happened, especially away from home, when they look so dreadful, when they are dreadful, to put it kindly? What has happened? Because they don't become bad players overnight. They're still very, very talented players, and they would still likely be the first 5 on the team sheet for most. But there's no getting away from it. The levels that we've come to expect from them, I'm going to discount Malik Thiaw in this because actually he's been absolutely superb. So the other 4 that I'm talking about, especially away from home, just nowhere near.
Well, Thiaw was one of the ones to come out with yesterday with a little credit.
Like West Ham,
yeah. But yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? And I guess that would be a question for them. But they're not here. So
is it confidence? Is it just when things aren't going for you as a team, then it's not going to go for you as an individual?
It feels like a mentality thing. I feel like there's a fear factor going away from home now. And look, I didn't think the performance against Bilbao was great, if I'm honest. I thought they did enough to win the game. But at the same time, if Bilbao had the Williams brothers and six other players that had missing first team players, then Newcastle, I think, would have come a cropper in that game if they put in that sort of performance. It was just the fact Bilbao ended the game with several youngsters or squad players in the side. But it just looks like a completely different team when they go away from home, and it looks as if they are struggling mentally. It looks as if they just can't or don't believe they can impose their physical attributes on opposition. It looks as if they don't believe that they can take command of a game away from home. Again, and we said last week, we spoke about mentality. We spoke about mentality quite a lot. That's a really strong question to be asked of Newcastle that needs to be answered.
Do you think they know what their best approach is? And I say this
I'd hope so.
with a defence, but do you? Because away from home, I'm not sure what anyone...
No.
I couldn't tell you what Newcastle's identity is. It used to be this intensity, but right now it's not. And I say this with a defensive Eddie Howe, that what happened in the summer, losing Alexander Isak, bringing in a striker who isn't a like-for-like replacement and having to deal with all that, and we'll get into that again in a moment. That is a big factor to why Newcastle United, especially away from home, are performing so badly. But that's the hand you've been dealt with, so you've just got to adapt to that. I look at that performance yesterday, and there just didn't seem to be any real belief in what they were doing at all.
No, they didn't. And you wonder if now this away form is getting into their heads. So that, to me, would say, if it is, then you've kind of, to a degree, probably got to shore things up first and foremost as a manager. And I know we don't like saying that. We don't like saying we're just going to sit out and try and be solid, be horrible, be defensive to a degree. Yet I feel as if Eddie's first mindset is to, can we get forward? But then it doesn't really work away from home, so you've got to think of something different. Is it a change in formation, like I said, about maybe moving Burn into a third centre-back and playing three in there? The Voltemada issue clearly isn't helping because he didn't really hold the ball up yesterday, but at the same time, I don't feel like Newcastle used him as they do in home games, which I know we're going to come on to. And that's a real concern that they haven't quite figured that out yet. I know he's still in the early stages of his career at Newcastle, but away from home, barring the goal against Brighton, when, let's be honest, it was something out of nothing, Newcastle haven't figured out how to get the best out of him on a match every single game, no matter where it's played, and that's a little bit of a concern. But the whole belief thing is, I think it's a real pertinent point.
I've got Scott here saying Botman is dealing with a dysfunctional midfield, goalkeeper and left back. He's the least of our problems.
There probably is something in that.
Yeah.
I think it is a point. And when you look, the strong Newcastle side of sort of 3 years ago, where you had sort of Joelinton and Willock dovetailing on that left-hand side with, it would have been Burn at left back, really, wouldn't it? But it was all neatly and tightly compacted together, and that they were working with each other. Whereas now it's been that many changes where Barnes has played there or Gordon's played there, and then you've had sort of, yes, Joelinton's been in, but sometimes it's been Ramsey playing or Willock's come in, and then the centre-back situation as well. So that there probably is something in that. I think it's probably a really good point.
Obviously, we can criticise the team selection and the formation, but the bottom line is that there was a lack of desire, I thought, from Newcastle United on the pitch against Brentford. And for me, what was even more worrying was they just couldn't string a series of passes together. It was like they were passing around a hand grenade at times. There was 1, 2, 3 passes at most, but then they were putting it in a touch. They were giving it straight to Brentford. There was one particular moment which really angered me, which was the ball's put into the box by Harvey Barnes. It's cleared out. Dan Burn tries to bring it down. It's a bad first touch. It bounces up in the air, and then he passes it over the defender, but then over Harvey Barnes and out for a goal kick. And it's like, you've got a second opportunity to put that ball in the box. We've got to be doing better with that. And then I text someone complaining about the standard of the passing during half time, and literally the first pass Newcastle put together was Jacob Murphy trying to pass it back to Kieran Trippier out into touch. And for all that Eddie Howe got certain things wrong on Sunday with the Dan Burns decision, and we got into formation in a moment, when the players on the pitch are not doing the basics, and that's stringing passes together, Eddie Howe can do little about that. That is down to the players, and their inability to pass to one another is destroying their flow, and they can't get that rhythm, and they can't move forward, and they can't create chances because every third or fourth pass is going to the opposition or out in a touch. And I don't think that's down to Eddie Howe. I think that's something that the players have got to step up and take responsibility for on the pitch.
So we can talk about the intricacies of the game. We can talk about link-up play. We can talk about supporting your teammates, anything like that. But what you say is true. The basics, the very basics of football weren't there yesterday, or didn't seem to be. And it wasn't even... I felt there was times... I'll tell you what annoyed me. There was one where Sven Botman tried to play like a 30, 40-yard crossfield ball to Kieran Trippier, who had a man on him. I'm like, why have you even seen that pass? Why have you thought that's the right move when there was a simple ball into midfield?
But that's happening more and more this season, and it's hospital passes. That's how I describe it, where someone's getting the ball and there's maybe 3 or 4 yards between him and a teammate, and he's either been played in so close to the touchline, he's got nowhere to turn, then he's got 2 men around him, and then he quickly passes it back. And often it actually happens with Dan Burn, gets the ball back to him. And at that point, we know what Dan Burn's like. If he's got to turn, he's in a lot of bother. I just, maybe in my head, I try and find defence. I try and think, look, the highest level I've played is not a very high level standard of football that's in the league. Do you know what I mean? So do we look at it and if we got to ask Dan Burn and Joe Linton about that passage of play on the left, why did you pass it so close to him and why did you quickly give it back to him despite you had 4 men around you? They might give me an answer which I never expected, because the levels are so different to what I've played and what I actually understand. But just looking at it, it looks like they're playing each other into danger. And actually, you could argue that a lot of the goals have conceded at home, away from home, and a lot of the results that have come about have actually come about because of sloppy play and because of moments like that. And then actually going forward, where it's not clicked, it's because of moments like that where you're not picking the right pass, but more importantly, you're playing each other into danger.
Regardless of levels that you played at, and I'm going to fall back on something that one of my good friends, Paul Dixon from BBC Newcastle, says: your eyes don't lie. Your eyes don't lie when you're watching football, regardless of your knowledge of the game, regardless of what level you played at. Like, I'm the same. I've not played anything except Sunday League, and that was a long time ago. But your eyes don't lie. It's simple as that. If someone's making the wrong move, if someone's making the wrong pass, if a 6-7 yard pass is going out astray, it's because it's not good enough. Regardless of if you've never kicked a ball in your life. What you're seeing on the pitch yesterday, I'd defy any Newcastle fan to look at that and say, no, that was all right, that performance. We just came out the wrong end of it. It was poor. Call it poor. Simple as that.
I mean, if you found a fan to on that train of thought, I'll give you $1 million.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, that's kind of the point that I'm making, is that it can't be that way. As Paul says, your eyes don't lie, and we saw what we saw yesterday, and you can't call it anything but poor. Well, you can. There's a lot of words you can call it. Poor is what
I genuinely, 25 minutes into the game yesterday, Googled the definition of hospital pass just to check that I was right in my thinking, and I certainly was. But yeah, it's the little things not getting done. And then we get on to Nick Voldemort, and it is clearly an issue. And I feel for the lad, and I feel for Eddie Howe in many ways, because it's not his fault. It's not Voldemort's fault. But again, I go back to the fact that this is the hand Eddie Howe has been dealt with, and we need to find a solution, particularly quickly. He's a very talented player, but he is not a centre forward. Now, look, things might be different if Johan Wissa hadn't suffered that injury. I would like to think they would be vastly different on a very positive note, but he's not, and Newcastle United have got to adapt to that. Formation-wise, I think there does need to be a formation. It is difficult. Howe has built such a successful side using this tried and tested formation, and some would say you don't rip up something that has proved so successful. But I'm not sure with Voldemort playing up front that they have the legs to be that intense side that we've loved watching for the last few years. I just don't think they've got it. And I think a formation change is needed to make sure they get the best out of Voldemort until Wissa is back, and goodness knows when that will be. So I'm going to make a bit of a wild suggestion here, because I just think it needs to happen. Look, Voldemort, when he's dropping deep, he's very good at getting the ball, bringing others into play. But the issue you've got, Mark, and it was on show yesterday, At times he collected the ball, centre circle was his average position. He's running forward, he's getting past players, beautiful. But then he's looking up for someone to hit. And I'm shouting, you're the person that you need to be hitting. And I think that is the biggest problem, that he's getting the ball, but there's no one to target after that. And the same with the crosses in the box, as we mentioned, a couple of examples where he needs to be in the box to hit those balls into the back of the net because there's not a threat there. My suggestion would be against Everton. So I'm not counting Man City because it's just pointless doing this against Man City. But I think against Everton, whether it be Willis Sula's fit, whether it be Johan Wissa, if it's not those two, I would go into the youth ranks and I would pick Sean Neve and I would say you are starting up top. Nick Valdemar is playing behind you and you're dropping Joe Linton against Everton, simply because I think having someone who knows how to play as a centre forward, who can be on the last man, is better than what Nick Valdemar is offering at the moment, because it's clearly not working. And as inexperienced as Sean Neve may be, and he hasn't played at all in the Premier League, no, and he might not be ready.
He's playing the first team competitively.
So you're going to tell me he's probably not ready either because you watch a lot of them. But I think it's time for something radical. I think something has to change to get the best out of Nick Valdemar. And as inexperienced as he is, Neve, he still should have that instinct. You know, he still should have something about him. If he's going to make it in the game, you have that instinct. It doesn't matter whether you're 16 or 25, you'll have that instinct. And I think right now, that is better for Newcastle United than just trying to persist with Nick Valdemar up top, unless Eddie Howe is proper brutal with Bruno Antonelli and says, when Valdemar drops deep, you have to get on your horse and you have to get beyond him and make sure that you're the man he's targeting. Or alternatively, he has to say to Nick Valdemar, do not drop deep. You stick on that last man, you're on his shoulder, do not drop back to the centre circle. But then that's not his game.
Yeah.
Just any one of those three suggestions sound like the solution?
The Neve one's a difficult one because there is clearly something there, 100%. There is a confidence, self-confidence in there. He makes the right moves. The interesting thing is, and there is a piece on Chronicle Live today, or went online yesterday, where I spoke to Adam Lawrence, the under-21s league coach, and he spoke about what they're doing at the moment, ironically, is try and show Neve in a number of positions across the final third, just to try and make him, in his words, a more rounded footballer. And it has worked to a degree. I know the results haven't quite been there for the 21s, but or 19s when it was the youth league. But he has kind of played in a number 10 role, which I know isn't helping your argument here.
No,
it's just a massive step from 21s to Premier League. I take your point. I think it's a valid one, that there is a need for a kind of natural number 9 to be in there. And I think at some point it will be something they need to do with Neve, where you can only say, well, he's got a lot of promise. At some point there has to be, go and show us what you can do. I don't think it's at that phase just yet. And I think the Everton game would be a really tough one to throw him in. But I would like to see it at some point. I just don't think that's the right game. What I think might happen is, if Gordon's fit, I wouldn't be shocked if he went in there. If I could be even more radical, there is a player in the squad that has played as a 9.
Don't suggest it. It did come across my mind.
Yeah, I know. But it's half in jest. But
you see, the question I would put to the listeners and viewers, and in that point, and I mentioned Sean Neve because I don't think Johan Wissa's going to be fit to start
or much fit.
Yeah, and there's a question mark over Sula and his ankle, so it was kind of last case scenario.
I get it.
What is better though is, because you're putting the suggestion there is that you could play Joe Linton up top and Valdemar off him, which Joe Linton as a striker never worked. Anthony Gordon as a striker doesn't work. And I go back to that point about that natural instinct. Has Sean Neve got that natural instinct to be a centre forward?
His goal scoring record would suggest so.
Because Gordon and Joe Linton don't. So if the solution was to play Joe Linton up top and Valdemar behind him, no, I'd rather just keep Valdemar up top by himself. And the same with Gordon as well. I don't think that would work either. I've seen no evidence just that works, despite what Gordon did for the under 19s, 21s, whatever it was. It just does not work. And look, I guess, we're talking about these wild solutions, to want of a better phrase. That shows you the issue Eddie Howe has, doesn't he? All this criticism on Howe,
it does,
spirals back to one or two things. You've got Isaac leaving and not a like-for-like replacement coming in, which is hard to do. You're never going to find a replacement for Isaac like-for-like because he's unique. You've got injuries to Lewis Hall and Tino Livramento, and of course Johan Wissa. And I think that has to be taken into consideration when we are criticising Eddie Howe.
100%.
He's not
100%.
immune to criticism. He said it himself in his post-match press conference that he accepts it, he takes full responsibility. Some of the in-game decisions have been a little bit strange, but I think the overarching problem of the league form as a whole spirals back to the transfer market and the injuries to key players. I think Newcastle United would look a lot different had Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall played the majority of games this season. Doesn't quite fix the issue up front. I think that does rest on Johan Wissa. And it's all ifs and buts, but there is context to why Newcastle United aren't flying as high as our friends down the road.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it would be oversimplifying to say if Johan Wissa was fit, because the simple fact is, if he had come in fully fit, or at least able to play, then Nick Voltemada's introduction to life in the Premier League would have been a bit more gradual, and he would have been either coming off the bench and getting moments here and there, or you would have been playing with Wissa just off him as that sort of deep lying forward role that he does so well. So yeah, I don't think it would be oversimplifying it. Go back to Neve. His goal scoring record in the 21s is really good this season. I think he's on, I could be wrong, I think it's 9 and 13, 14. It is in the piece that I wrote, but I wrote it on Saturday. So a lot of stuff's happened between now and then. So yeah, I think it would be an option, and he would give you that natural movement and that kind of instinct, as you say. The lack of alternatives is scary. And again, it does go back to the summer of, were the right moves made? Well, they were, kind of, because Newcastle couldn't anticipate Wissa picking up an injury on international duty, which is when it happened. So you have to feel for Howe to a degree. You again, bang on when you said his in-game decision-making has been a little muddled in recent weeks. And it's trying to find a way to get through this period when we do have players out. I think the Livramento and Hall absences can't be underplayed. I think they are fundamental to how an Eddie Howe team plays, getting forward, sort of driving forward from full-back or wing-back, whatever you want to call it. But again, I just think there's too many players out of form. There's too many players feeling sorry for themselves. And I don't want to give players an excuse by saying, this injury, that injury, that injury. You still go out there and do the basics, and they haven't done that. And I would hope there's a lot of soul searching going on in that dressing room. Obviously, we don't see what goes on in there, but I hope there's a lot of players looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, am I doing enough right now, particularly away from home? Because I don't think there's many can say there is. And look, I take it, it's difficult winning away in the Premier League. It's difficult winning in the Premier League, but they're not helping themselves at all. And that's a big issue.
Yeah, at the very least, we want to see a bit of passion and fight, just want for the ball. I mean, I think it was the actual penalty that was given 50-50 between Tonali and, I'm going to say, Damsgaard in the middle. That's a bit of a guess, but definitely Tonali. And Damsgaard, let's give him the credit if it is him, just wants it more. It's a feisty challenge right in the middle. Tonali goes down, wants a free kick, holding his ankle, suddenly sits up, and by the time he sits up, Tara's on the floor. And that, in that moment, kind of summed up the difference between Brentford and Newcastle yesterday. It was every single ball. Who wanted it more? And there was only one answer, really. And the players have to take some responsibility for that. Our listeners and viewers watching live have given some suggestions. We've got Sahari here saying definitely a 4-2-3-1. Miley and Tonali as a double pivot with Bruno in the number 10 behind Valdemare until Wissa is fit. And the kind of phrase says you could just push Big Joe much higher at times, which it looked like a game plan at home last week. Let us know in the comments what you would do. Plenty of criticism over or on Eddie Howe. I mean, let's get one thing straight. Eddie Howe's future shouldn't even be up for debate. the man has won Newcastle United their first domestic trophy in 70 years, and deserves all the credit that came with that. So he's got plenty of credit in the bank. Questions can and should be asked over some of the decision making yesterday, particularly that Dan Burn incident. But Eddie Howe, for me, is still the man to lead Newcastle United forward. He will turn this around. We've seen this before. I think long term, that's something he has to sort out, that we can't keep coming into every season having a run of 8, 9, 10 games waiting for it to click, because the best teams in the league don't click. They just are there. You don't need to press a button. It just happens, and it happens consistently. I think you said a few weeks ago he's a kind of a streaky manager. Long term, I think that might be an issue, and I would bet on Eddie Howe sorting that out as well. They were a team in transition. We've mentioned the reasons for that: injuries, transfer window. There is context to why things aren't going quite to plan. However, there are questions that need to be asked about formation and personnel. 2 weeks now to get on the training pitch. You won't have everyone at hand. Some players carrying knocks, some players carrying injuries. How big of a 2 week is this? Big of a fortnight is this for Eddie Howe in terms of finding the solution? And are you still backing him as Newcastle United's long-term manager?
Yeah, I'd just say that there's enough credit in the bank there, but that can only last so long. And there are questions to answer, and I think mentality is a big one of them. Obviously, that doesn't come necessarily from the manager; that comes from the players themselves. And when I look at the amount of points, I think they've lost more points from winning positions than any other club in the Premier League this season. They haven't won away from home in the Premier League this season. Worst away record in the division. That speaks of an issue, and it speaks of, the fact that I hate saying this because I don't like accusing players of this sort of thing and not trying, because that's rubbish. They wouldn't be playing the Premier League if they weren't trying, or they weren't, at least trying to make something happen. But it's difficult when you see them in the Champions League and you see them, going at it in the Champions League and producing the intensity levels that they did against your Barcelonas and away at San Gil and such like. And then you see what they've done the last 2 away games. There are questions to answer, and they're really, really pertinent questions that need answered about what is this Newcastle United side about now, because we're kind of come full circle of the conversation we started with. But, if intensity is the identity, or was the identity, what is it now? Because there's nothing to suggest that is it. And they're big questions. Now, it's going to be difficult to answer those over the international break because there's so many players away. It's going to be really interesting to see how they turn up against Manchester City, because I watched them yesterday and at times they were frightening. They look like they've got that aura back. They look as if they're a team that should be feared to a degree.
But it wouldn't surprise you whatsoever for Newcastle to win that game.
But that would annoy me.
It would annoy me as well.
Yeah.
But
it wouldn't. I'd be over the moon. But...
No, but it wouldn't. No, but it would annoy me.
Yeah.
It would annoy me. I was annoyed on Wednesday on one hand that they beat Bilbao, because I knew exactly what was going to happen against Brentford, and you fans are right to be annoyed at that, because it shouldn't be that predictable, but it was. We knew what was going to happen, and it wouldn't surprise you at all, because this is what will happen against Manchester City. Either they will get a really positive result, or they'll get absolutely hammered. But it wouldn't surprise me if they end up picking up a win against City and then losing to Everton. That is the kind of topsy-turvy nature that we're not enjoying it, that we're suffering with Newcastle United at the moment. Experiencing. Interesting there when I said Eddie Howe's future shouldn't be for debate. A lot of people that have got back there who are watching live in the comments and saying, you should be allowed to ask those questions. You guys are more than allowed to ask those questions. I'm just saying, from my point of view, when I am asking questions of Eddie Howe, it's certainly not about his long-term future, because I still believe he is the man to get things right at Newcastle, and he's got so much right. This is more than a blip. This is a slump, and it needs to be fixed and quickly, because the aim is still Champions League football, most certainly. And if you don't get Champions League football, the knock-on effect of that is monetary, and which stars and then knock on the door and ask to leave. That's the bigger picture. He'll be aware of that. The board will be aware of that. The players will be aware of that. But as Eddie Howe said on Friday about Tonali's future, it's down to the players to be a success, to make sure they get Champions League football. And what I would say about Sunday against Brentford, there was a lot that Eddie Howe got wrong, but at the end of the day, they went into that interval 1-0 up. So the platform was there to build on it. And when the players run back over that white line, that's on them. Now, of course, he can affect that by the decisions he makes, and Burn should have come off, etc. But a large part of that is down to the players not stepping up and seizing the initiative to get a second goal.
But yeah, you are right. But I think it's just a little lack of direction across the board, on and off the pitch. I think it's a bit of a lack of what's the word?
Go on, say clarity. Do it.
No, it's not clarity. I'm looking for. They weren't proactive enough. They weren't proactive enough as a coaching staff. They weren't proactive enough as a team on the pitch. There wasn't enough. How can we improve this? What can we change on the pitch? Yes, you'll say that direction comes from the dugout. But at the same time, I would have liked, accountability is another word we could use, I would have liked the experienced players on the pitch to get people in and start. I said it earlier, I'm sorry I'm repeating again, but I would have liked players to go and get the teammates, come on, let's get the going here. And I didn't see that. Now, that's a concern. So I think, yeah, it's that proactive thing and not being reactive. You could see what was happening with Burn, go make that change. When the levels were being dropped in midfield, are those difficult conversations going on? Is Bruno, are they saying, come on, we need to get going here, let's, because the top teams do that. It's not always, we spoke about before we started recording, in top dressing rooms, it's full of egos, it's full of high demands. You look at the best teams in the Premier League, like, you kind of Man United, late 90s, those sort of sides. I can't imagine someone like Roy Keane allowing that performance to happen. They've got to start on the pitch taking accountability a little bit more. And it's easy to fall back on the manager. Well, he didn't do this. Yeah, he didn't. But nobody comes out of yesterday with any credit. Nobody. Not really.
A few comments coming in from those watching live. The kind of phrase says there will be an upturn in fortune when we have Hall, Tino, Wissa, Gordon and Asura 100% available.
It's interesting to see Asula put into that mix, isn't it?
We're desperate for a centre forward, aren't we?
It's an option, isn't it?
Blockhead says, time to drop Botman. Never thought I'd say that or this, but he looks shocking at the moment. Worst of the four centre-backs. And Flynn saying, Andrew, you're admitting Howe is making mistakes, but can't question his future. I don't think... I think that's a little bit harsh. Yeah, I'm admitting he's made mistakes against Brentford, without a doubt, and I'm questioning them and asking. And obviously, he was asked why yesterday that he did that, but I'm not questioning his long-term future. I don't think the mistakes he made against Brentford warrant a discussion about whether Eddie Howe is going to be in a job in a month's time. I don't see that, and I guess that's just my opinion.
It boils down to: do you think you can turn it around? And I do at the moment. Absolutely,
yeah, I do as well. And obviously, some people watching and they're entitled to their opinion, and perhaps don't. Flynn, do let me know your thoughts on that. Yeah, I wish we'd talk about something positive. Can we find a positive? Come on, search anyone.
They've got to you know what? So again, yeah, you're right. That players aren't going to be around. There is going to be a large proportion of the squad that aren't. But the 2-week break does give them a chance to just take heed and have some conversations away from the training pitch and get on the training pitch and work with what he's got and try and get to the bottom. So there is a little bit of breathing space now just to have those conversations. Those, what's going on here? Why is this happening? We know this is where Howe can be at his best when he gets a chance to analyse. There's your positive.
It'll be interesting to see how many of those not on international duty go away for a few days. Are they going to hang around the training ground and put in that extra little bit of work?
But sometimes that can be counterproductive, Maybe they do need just that little bit.
But comment earlier in the show from someone said we're talking about the same problems that we hear last international break. Some players went away before they came back and trained.
But even if they just have a couple of days away, take their minds off it a little bit. I mean, some of them will dwell on it because that's the characters. Maybe there is need for that. Maybe it has come at the right time in a weird way. Maybe dwelling on it helps them because it makes them realise we've got to get something done here. It all depends on individual characters. But I think Eddie, I wouldn't question him yet. I wouldn't. I question the decision making, but I think in terms of his long-term future, it depends on, and this is very much on the individual. If you believe he can turn it round and start getting, we shouldn't forget we are in a quarter-final of a Carabao Cup again. Got the FA Cup to come, good position in the Champions League. So there are positives, but the league form is a real concern. It's no good doing well in the Champions League if you sat looking over your shoulders in the Premier League, and that's where the improvement has to come. If you believe Howe can bring that around, then we shouldn't question his future.
Let us know in the comments, is Eddie Howe still the man for you? He is for me and Mark, and hopefully he proves us right on that. Big few weeks to come, and hopefully some solutions found during the international break. I've been Andrew Musgrove. He has been Mark Crothers. This has been the Monday Show via the Everything is Black and White podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for listening. Remember to take advantage of your NordVPN offer in the podcast description box. And for myself and Mark, we will see you guys next week.